Okay, so we're back listening to David Lewis. I want to check out the question and answer period. Still waiting to find out if we're going to get an M&M response to Benzino. Megan the Stallion, is she going to respond? Is she going to get up on our GoFoot? Okay, but in the meantime, we'll be listening to David Lewis about what experience teaches. I think what experience teaches me is that you don't make diss tracks against Eminem. But we'll see. We will see. All right, here we go.
Right. Do you want to chair? Or shall I? Okay, about how long do you want to go? Right.
We'll take questions from the audience and some discussion if people would like to put any points to Professor Lewis. Not for a great amount of time, so we might have to limit discussion. If you could possibly keep your questions reasonably brief.
Perhaps Professor Lewis would like an initial, very frivolous comment, namely that Marmite and Vegemite taste quite different.
I was misinformed by somebody who claimed to be acquainted with both. He is not here, as a matter of fact. I'll name no names.
If no one else is willing to ask a question as a non-philosopher, and I'll ask a very naive question. I seem to recall Russell hoped in some sort of popular context with the question whether computers are superior to humans.
Wait, hold on. It's hard to hear. It sounds like what he's saying is no one's going to ask a question, so I'll ask a question. But what is he saying?
Namely that Marmite and Vegemite taste quite different.
All
I was
right.
misinformed by somebody who claimed to be acquainted with both. He is not here, as a matter of fact. I'll name no names.
If no one else is willing to ask a question as a non-philosopher, and I'll ask a very naive question.
Oh, he said as a non-philosopher, I'll ask a naive question. Okay.
Hope in some sort of popular context with the question whether computers are superior to human beings or not. And if I recall correctly, he conceded to computers that they could solve some problems that virtual matter couldn't solve, but he said they are inferior in not having feelings. I think I recall this correctly. Would you say that either what I have said inaccurately is relevant to what you've been saying, or on the other hand, what you may remember more accurately about what you pronounced on the subject is in any way relevant to what you've been saying? In other words,
So he's saying he heard that computers maybe. So he asked someone, I don't know who, they said that computers might be better at solving problems, but they don't have feelings. So I think he's asking Lewis if he agrees with that. Is that what he's asking?
would you feel some sort of connection with kind of popular value judgments such as that?
Yes, there is a connection. And I think it might be this. I think that the thought that you expressed, or that you cited Russell as expressing.
Oh, that was Russell they were talking about? Russell said that computers lack feelings? Did I just whistle? Feelings. Feelings. What the hell?
Is a thought that someone might easily come to in a few steps.
Yeah, by the way, you know Lewis is going to deny this, right? Because he's a functionalist, so I think he's going to say computers can be conscious, right?
One, my premise, experience is the best teacher. Step two, there must be phenomenal information. There must be some kind of information we get when we experience a feeling, but not when we go to physics lectures. Step 3. This is what I called, rather unkindly, parapsychological information. Information about the non-physical aspects of the causal order. But as for computers, we know their physics in great detail. We may not know everything there is to know about their physics, just as a part of not knowing everything there is to know about physics generally, but we know enough to be quite sure that we don't need any extra parapsychological causal order to explain what computers do. And if that's right, then feelings are things about which there's phenomenal information. Phenomenal information is about the parapsychological aspect. Computers don't have a parapsychological aspect, therefore computers don't have feelings.
Okay, so that's, he thinks, like a way you could arrive at that conclusion. I think he's going to reject this line of reasoning, though, right?
I would say that there are 2 mistakes here. One mistake is to think that we need to accept the phenomenal information hypothesis instead of the ability hypothesis. The other is to assume that phenomenal information must be information about an extra part of the causal order which we know doesn't show up in computers. So I think the relevance is that 2 of the things I was attacking as errors taken together would lead to the conclusion that computers can't have feelings.
I mean, say whatever you want, but in 1981, to be arguing that you could have, machine consciousness is very far-field. Now, it's still, people debate it, but it's much more plausible given things like what ChatGPT can do. And even though I wouldn't say that it's reasonable that ChatGPT is conscious, it's reasonable to think that, gee, a few steps from ChatGPT could have a lot of the things that neuroscientists think are important for consciousness, like models and workspaces and things of this nature. If so, then it's not, and most of these people, by the way, that support these theories of consciousness think you could build them into machines. So he's thinking very far ahead here, but that's interesting. So he obviously thinks that since functionalism is true, and that's what these states are, and then in us, they are physically realized by brain states, but really all you need to do to have a mind, according to, I guess, the Jackson. I was thinking of Frank Jackson, but because Jackson kind of has adopted this view, I think, later in life. The Lewis view is that you have something that implements these functional roles, and something in the computer can implement those functional roles as well. Wait, hold on.
One is, could you say, why it is that, say, a being couldn't have the abilities without having, say, what we might say the physicist learns or comes to experience for the first time when she goes out and sees things? And secondly, what would you say to the view that she acquires those abilities because she acquires something else? Granted, she has the abilities, but at least part of the explanation of why that is because she acquires something.
Sounds to me...
Okay, I was trying to turn it down before he started talking, since the audience doesn't have a mic, and he clearly does. Oh, you got me. Okay, so first thing is, why couldn't she have these abilities in the room? I think the answer is they could. It just had to be implanted by a neuroscientist or something weird would have to happen. So, but not in a normal way, typical way. And then secondly is, why not think she acquires these abilities? Because she acquires something else, namely, knowing what it's like. Aren't those abilities based on or grounded in knowing what it's like? That's what I would say. Yes is the answer to myself. Yes. Cool. All right.
Like one question put two ways, and it's something I was thinking about.
Wait, hold on.
Like
What?
one
Why that is if you call something.
sounds to me like one question put two ways, and it's something I was thinking about discussing if there'd been more time.
Okay, good.
The proposal is, let's see, I will pretend that you are an advocate of the proposal, though I know that really you're just asking me to comment on it. The proposal is to turn the tables on me. The proposal is this notion of knowing how, as distinct from possessing information, is a bit of a mistake. You see, one way we get to have abilities is to possess phenomenal information. And possession of phenomenal information gives us abilities that we couldn't get in any other way. And with varying levels of plausibility, you can tell that story about each of my examples. Not the knowing Lloyd George. That would still have to be treated as something different. But as for knowing how to wiggle the ears, one could imagine that if only you knew what it was like to wiggle your ears, if only you had the phenomenal information, then suddenly you could start wiggling your ears. The thing that hinders you from doing it is not knowing what it would be like to do it. Similarly, you could imagine that if only you knew what it was like to be a skilled user of chopsticks, presto, you'd be a skilled user of chopsticks. Most plausibly of all, and this one may even be, in a sense, right, I think, if you knew what it was like to see the shape of a C-38 locomotive, straightway you'd get the ability to recognize a C-38 locomotive by sight. So far, indeed, I think that what I've said is correct. Knowing what it's like to see one or to see a diagram of one, being able to imagine the shape of one, being able to visualize, and being able to tell them by sight quickly without doing a lot of measurements and geometrical calculation go together. And somebody who's trying to turn the tables on me might say, that's because, you see, just as getting some physical information is the necessary ingredient in the ability to open a combination lock, so getting some phenomenal information is the necessary ingredient in the ability to recognize a C-38 locomotive by sight, or maybe to use chopsticks skillfully or wiggle your ears. I used to think...
I don't think you need to have that answer to all of those things. But yes, that's generally along the lines. What's you going to say? You used to think this was a good answer?
Was a standoff, but I don't think that anymore.
Oh, standoff. Oh, really?
Because if you use possession of phenomenal information as part of your causal explanation of abilities which are exercised in physical occurrences, when you say, hey, there's a C-38, or you eat with chopsticks, or you wiggle your ears, then the phenomenal aspect of things, the alleged phenomenal aspect of things, has caused you to have phenomenal information, which has caused you to have an ability, which has caused physical things to move in ways they wouldn't otherwise have moved. Now the phenomenal aspect has a causal role in the physical world. Now we can describe it in terms of its causal role. That enables us to give lessons on it to the inexperienced, but it still won't enable them to learn what it's like to have the experience, so it wasn't really phenomenal information. So I don't think
Okay, so hold on. So what's the big idea here? The big idea is, so he used to think it was like a standoff, his view versus the kind of acquaintance view. Basically, you learn from, you have these things because of that. So his objection to that, um, his objection to that is that, okay, so if you do have phenomenal information, then you should be able to teach it to someone because it's information. I mean, I don't like putting this in terms of information. You come to know what it's like. You come to have the experience. But it's fine to talk about information, I guess, if you have to. It's a bit weird. Um, there is a proposition, this is what it's like to see red, that you can have when you're, that you can form and think about and know when you're directly having the experience. So, okay. But his claim is that if that's the case, then it's something that has a physical effect and therefore can be taught. Let me just hear this one more time.
Have phenomenal information, which has caused you to have an ability, which has caused physical things to move in ways they wouldn't otherwise have moved. Now the phenomenal aspect has a causal role in the physical world. Now we can describe it in terms of its causal role.
So first of all, that's supposed to be a dig at the guys who think that this is epiphenomenalism. So remember when Jackson first put the knowledge argument out, the title of the paper was Epiphenomenal Qualia. What he was trying to argue for was a type of epiphenomenalism, that these things are there but don't do anything. So that's, no one likes that. We try to avoid it if you can. But certainly this is not a point against like the physicalist who thinks, yeah, of course these things are going to have causal roles. It's just a question of whether they are those causal roles. Okay, but anyway, so you see what he's trying to dig at them. He's like, okay, so now it has a causal role. So now we can describe it and
enables us to give lessons on it to the inexperienced, but it still won't enable them to learn what it's like to have the experience, so it wasn't really phenomenal information.
So whatever it is isn't really, it still isn't the thing which we think, because whatever it is can't be taught. Look, some people are going to disagree with that, but it's an interesting line that he's taking right here. It's interesting that as soon as you, according to him, as soon as you allow this thing to do the job that the advocate of the knowledge argument wants it to do, then they've kind of shot themselves in the foot because they've turned it into something which does have a functional role, can be described, and can be communicated without the experience. So, but whatever that we're trying to get after here is supposed to be the thing which you can't have without that. And that's the ability stuff. So I think that's where he's going. I think that's the argument that he's making here. Interesting. I don't think this is in the paper. Is this in the paper? Or is this just part of his views generally? I'm not sure. Interesting.
So I don't think now that this attempt to turn the tables produces even a standoff. Then I misunderstood the first question so that it was in effect equivalent to the second. Take it again.
The abilities, at least many of the abilities that we say she would acquire, we could, or asking, why do you suppose that she couldn't acquire those abilities? Or that machine couldn't have those abilities?
Well, he did answer that. He said that she could acquire those if you could teach her this stuff. Or tweak her brain in certain ways. He's going to talk really loud again, isn't he?
Without having seen the graphs, haven't had the phenomenal acquaintance with the graphs. Because unless you can defeat that, then your reply presently would be begging the question.
He said, unless you can defeat that, you're just begging the question.
Here we can tell the story where yes, the phenomenal information can play causal roles, but by hypothesis there'd still be something lacking. Therefore, the ability wouldn't be sufficient. Or it wouldn't be all there is to having the experience.
Why do I say that you get the package of abilities if and only if you come to know what the experience is like? Typically by having the experience, never by taking lessons, maybe conceivably by magic or surgery. Well, it seems to me, first, that the abilities really do account for the sort of performances that the knowing what it's like was supposed to account for, though it couldn't have accounted for them if it was possession of phenomenal information. It seems to me, second, that the package of abilities is acquired in just the circumstances in which we think the knowing what it's like is acquired. Now, I think that's the part you think is begging the question. But I don't think we have any independent grip on this concept, knowing what an experience is like, except by the role it plays in our common sense, half-systematic psychology. And the role laid down for it does include being acquired by and large in just such ways and not in just such other ways.
Okay, so he's appealing to folk psychology and saying that it's part of folk psychology that you could get these things from experience. So that's part of his answer, is that we're trying to preserve folk psychology as much as possible.
If it's true, or close enough to true, that the package of abilities is acquired in just such ways and not in just such other ways, that'll make the package of abilities fit the role. Now, if you ask me, do I think it's absolutely impossible to get the package of abilities in an abnormal way, say by doing the thing that we mostly can't do and somehow extracting it from your scientific information? I don't know that that's absolutely impossible. But I don't have to say that whatever knowing what it's like turns out to be has to fit the popular stereotype of knowing what it's like perfectly.
Yeah. So that's the point I was making. I think I made this in the last video when we were listening to his overall view, is that you have to accommodate as many of the kind of platitudes from folk psychology as you can, but because, according to him, it's a big or statement, the mind is like this or like that and this or. If one or the other of them is false, but overall they're true, then it's not going to affect too many things.
Just well enough.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, and finally this is what you really did ask me, unless I've misunderstood you again, why it's not possible to get to know what it's like without acquiring the abilities, or to acquire the abilities without getting to know what it's like, I think I don't have enough independent... I don't have...
Well, hold on now. Could you acquire the abilities? So if they gave you the surgery and you were sleeping and they gave you your brain surgery so that you could recognize red. You've never seen red before, let's imagine. Recognize red, think about red, predict whether red would be your favorite color or not. So you're there sleeping, they're doing the surgery. You haven't opened your eyes yet. Suppose you do open your eyes. You don't see any red things, so you don't exercise any of those abilities. Do you know what it's like to see red then? You're walking around, you have all of these abilities, there's no red objects, so they're not triggered. You don't think about red, you don't imagine red, you don't predict yourself. So you have the abilities, but you don't have... So I would say you don't know what it's like to see red until you see red, and then you like, or until you exercise those abilities. So if you actually imagined red and therefore tokened some red or something like that. But even so, wouldn't there be a way of exercising those abilities and you still not knowing what it's like to see red? Because knowing what it's like to see red depends on it being there, in my view. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Huh.
In order to consider such a possibility, I'd have to have a grasp on this notion of knowing what it's like, independent of the grasp that I get from common sense psychology, and I don't have it.
But isn't it part of common sense psychology that knowing what it's like depends on it being there? You experiencing it? Not just that you'll get it from experience, but that experiencing it is knowing what it's like. Forming that concept, importantly involving the experience itself. That's part of common sense psychology too, right?
I think if I believe the theory
lunchtime.
of phenomenal information, that would give me an independent grasp on the notion of knowing what it's like.
Yeah.
And that would put me in a position to conceive of the possibility of knowing what it's like without getting the abilities, or vice versa. But I don't believe that theory.
I've got a number of people who have indicated they'd like to contribute to the discussion. I'm going to be unfair in one quite distinct way, and I'm not going to take them in order. We're not going to have time for everyone who's indicated that they would like to ask questions. I'd like to make that time available to anyone who's not a Trobe philosopher and isn't going to get a chance to ask David Lewis a question any other time. The Trobe philosophers will get that chance. Sorry for that.
Professor, what is the instance of pure information? You seem to suggest that while most cases will mix the word information.
What is the case of pure information, I think is the question?
A pure case of acquisition of information.
Oh, okay, a pure case of acquisition. I guess the idea from the speaker or the questioner must be that a pure case would be like having the experience.
Well, I think what I said was there are cases where acquiring an ability is entirely a matter of acquiring information. That was the kind of pure case. And coming to know something was entirely a matter of acquiring information. There wasn't any ability obtained over and above what could be explained by possessing the information. Well, my example was learning the combination of the lock on the bank vault. Learning, that is, that this lock is such...
I mean, you still need to know how to open a combination lock. If it's like the left, right, left ones, you need to know that. How twisty, or if it's punchy. So there's still some know-how involved, not just information.
Would open if you turned it twice to the left to 14 and once to the right to 34 and so forth.
I guess the question then
I guess that's the information. Once to the right. Still have to know how to twist it. You may think I'm being pedantic, but people this does disassociate in actual real life cases. People with brain damage can understand conceptually what they're supposed to do. Like they'll know the light switch turns on the light, but they'll be unable to know, they don't know how to interact with it. So they won't know that you're supposed to flick the switch to turn it on or off. So you still have to know how to do it too. It's not purely knowing that, I would say. But,
makes the knowledge that it's this lock.
oh wait, hold on.
You
What
turned
was
it twice to the left to 14 and once to the right to 34 and so forth.
But I guess the question then comes, what makes it knowledge that it's this lock? Can that be explicated as information?
What makes it knowledge that it's this lock? Okay, so someone's bringing this indexical to monster development into it. So, yeah, That's another popular strategy, saying that these concepts are somehow involving demonstratives, like pointing. This is what it's like to see red. You can Chalmers thinks you can argue against that by showing that you could have an inverse Mary, where her red is our green, and she comes out and says, "This is what it's like to see red," but she is pointing at mentally at a what we would call a green experience. In fact, I have some green I'm looking at right here, a nice juice that was just brought to me very kindly. So she looks at a red tomato. Inverse Mary looks at a red tomato. She says, "Oh, that's what it's like to see red," and she's kind of mentally pointing at her green experience. But she doesn't know what it's like to see red because she's experiencing green. So I think this kind of argument from Chalmers, to me, is successful. It does suggest that whatever these kind of direct phenomenal concepts are, they're not like indexicals or pointings or something like that. But okay, so that's interesting. Still, we'll get to hear what Lewis says.
There's a theme in the discussion, turns up in Nagel's BAT paper. I don't think it's very relevant, which I played down. I spoke of information as information about the world. But there's a kind of information which is information about my place in the world. Suppose that the world the history of the world consists of 5 exact repetitions. I could learn what the world is like, here are these 5 exact repetitions, and not know whether I'm the guy who plays a certain role in the first repetition, or the second, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth. Okay. We can call this self-ascriptive information. I've called it de se information.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know who tried to make a big deal of this was John Perry in his book, Knowledge, Possibility, and Consciousness. Is that what the... Oh, man, it's been a long time since I read that book. Anyway, so I used to love that book, though. It's what sucked me into all of these debates, I think, way back in the day. So, anyway, yeah, the idea that there's a kind of, you might not know where so you look at a map. So you suppose someone kidnaps you, you wake up in a room, so there's a map of the area. But you don't know where in the area you are, so you can know everything about the area and not know where you are in the area. Okay, so that's self-locating information. Good. I think also you can make a case that this isn't really what direct phenomenal concepts are after either, but okay, let's go back on.
Now, I could have gone through the whole argument, saying at every step, physical information doesn't help about the world, doesn't help you know what it's like, and physical information about your own place in the world doesn't help either. I left that complication out. Now, I think that the impurity that you may be detecting in the case of information about the bank lock is that it isn't entirely information about the world. It's information that you might best express with a first-person pronoun and also a present tense. The lock of the bank that is closest to me right now is such that it would open if da-da-da-da. So I don't think that's pure information about the world. I do think it's pure information. I do think it can be explained in terms of possible cases. I am a possible individual such that the closest bank has a lock with combination, etc. I am not a possible individual elsewhere in the world, or maybe in another possible world, whose closest bank has a lock with combination so-and-so. Pure information about the world? Compound with structural formula so-and-so can't be boiled because it decomposes before it gets to boiling point. How will that do?
Did we skip something? Okay, interesting. So he doesn't think that stuff's going to help. Some people do make a big deal out of this kind of stuff. Interesting. I've been thinking a lot about this because of the book that I'm working on. But okay, very cool stuff going on here. Let's finish this up.
I think, with regret, ask you, before we thank Professor Lewis once again, do what I should have done before and welcome people who come from other universities and from anywhere else.
Okay, so that's very nice. Let's go ahead and cut that up. Wow, this was cool to hear. Gives you a lot to think about. I still feel the same qualms that I always have about the ability hypothesis. Yeah, interesting though. Cool.